After Elon announced his identity, the guards looked at each other skeptically. Elon Manisil. The guards turned their skeptical gaze on Elon, a man dressed too casually, if not shabbily. Of course the guards would hardly believe that this man was one of the strongest wizards on the continent. They nodded at each other in agreement with that suspicion. Although the front gate of the palace was open during the ceremony, it was purely symbolic. Not everyone can enter the palace, and the invitation was sent half a year ago, so the sheriff told Elon, even Elon Manisil, you must have an invitation to come in. Elon smiled as if he had been waiting for this answer for a long time. With a grin on her face, Elon didn't even look for the invitation, but the rope let out a profanity. Damn it, so Kairos distinguishes guests by their appearance. What has just been witnessed makes Kalyan completely surprised. What is this? Kalyan thought, judging how others dress to discriminate is a problem, but Elon Manisil is deliberately making it difficult in this matter. He seems to be making excuses to avoid staying in Kairos. Maybe it was as Kalyan thought. The next second, Elon didn't bother to explain or reason anymore, immediately turned his head to leave. Okay, so let's go home. Kalyan sees that Elon's action is too fast and begins to chase anxiously. If we let him go like this. Realizing his intentions, Yen shouted to stop immediately. No, the king had an order not to allow anyone to go out during the festival. However, the Kalyan's gaze very quickly was no longer placed on the Yen. He fidgeted and stared at Elon, who was leisurely riding away. Kalyan dared not even blink. His heart boiled with anxiety. Like this, I lost track of him. Kalyan grabbed hold of Raven's reins and rushed away in Yen's stunned gaze. He hurried just in time to throw a sentence back to his trusted administrator. Yen, you try your best to stop the soldiers. Yen tried to shout to stop Kalyan, electricity, highness, but Kalyan had no mind to look back. He urged the horse, let's go Raven, and Raven just rushes forward. The guards hurriedly blocked the road when they saw the Kalyan flying towards the palace gate, his highness, quickly disembarking his horse. The captain of the guard panicked at Raven's speed, tried to shout to dissuade the Kalyan. The king had orders that no one was allowed to go out. Kalyan took the reins to signal. Raven immediately understood, and while accelerating, he jumped up, rushed over the guards' heads and out of the palace. The guards were shocked by the Kalyan's bold action. Immediately, the guards made a fuss. The prince had emerged. Kalyan, on the other hand, ignored all that he had just left in pursuit of Elon. The guards rushed up to chase the Kalyan. Hurry, prepare the horses, chase him right away. Seeing that, Yen immediately trembled with anxiety. Kalyan will not be able to bear the consequences of his actions. He has made a very good impression so far. If you make a mistake now, it will all be in vain. That's why Yen panics. What to do, like this, the prince will. While confused, Yen recalled the last command that Kalyan gave before leaving. Yen, doing everything to stop the soldiers for me. Yen bit his lips, seems to have made up his mind. Let's focus. I'm a servant of Prince Kalyan, but I have to protect his highness at all costs. This is my responsibility. The moment the guards jumped on their horses and were ready to chase after the Kalyan, Yen yelled for their attention, stopping there. After a moment of hesitation, Yen eloquently declared, it was the Duke Siegfried who allowed the Kalyan prince to go out. All the eyes of the guards were on Yen. Who are you to call the Duke so straight? Yen immediately let go of his neatly tied hair to hide his identity as a servant. Fortunately, he is not wearing a butler uniform right now. Yen boldly introduced, I am Soroyan Siegfried. The eldest son of the Duke Siegfried. Yen stood boldly in front of the guards with burning power in his eyes. Very soon after, Slayman's chuckle echoed in the garden next to the hall where the party took place. Even tried to restrain himself, but he still laughed with tears. After a long laugh, he had to stop to wipe his tears. Then he opened his mouth again, but instead of saying something, another laugh rang out, and this time Slayman also patted his black thighs, causing the Yen next to him to redden his face with shyness. Hearing the crunchy laughter without knowing where to stop, Yen finally exploded and said, there is nothing funny, father. Seeing Yen sulk, Slayman once again wiped his tears and tried to suppress his laughter. Sorry, I can't believe my son has such a smart move. Slayman laughed again. This time he grabbed Yen's neck and rubbed his head. Look at the son who ran away from home just to raise a kid, Yen shouted when his hair was messed up. Dad. After releasing Yen, Slayman smiled pleasantly at him, but it was the right decision. Yen adjusted his hair and looked at Slayman with worried eyes. It's not a problem, you have to find a way to solve the problem. What if the king asks? Slayman laughed again, but not with a funny smile, but a father's smile to his innocent, immature son. Yen did work without thinking it through, but Slayman said calmly, he wouldn't ask. Yen stared bewilderedly at Slayman. Well, I mean. Slayman firmly reassured Yen that he would not question. Romain was naturally suspicious. Meanwhile, the party was going well when the king's assistant approached the king. Because there were many people around, the assistant immediately covered her mouth and spoke as quietly as possible, reporting the Kalyan and Siegfried. just as Slayman expected, the king said nothing, though there were many doubts in his heart. In the garden, Slayman explained to Yen, if the king of Romaine asked the three princes what they had to do with me, then he can't do anything to us no matter what the answer is. If Colleen and Siegfried had no relationship and were only helped by chance, Romaine would surely be wary of Siegfried's good intentions. However, doubt will still arise even if Colleen and Siegfried are related. If Romaine punished the prince, he could not ignore the Siegfried's assurance to him, and if he doesn't punish the prince, it's like tacitly recognizing the peaceful relationship between our family and the prince. The Brisson family certainly didn't like this, and it would be difficult. With no other choice, Romaine was forced to decide not to do anything when he heard the story that the prince was guaranteed by the Siegfrieds. It's better that this never happened. Slayman gave a confident smile as if assuring his son, so buried this as if nothing had happened, regardless of the reason why the prince left the city. Meanwhile, the sound of horse hoofs broke the quiet atmosphere in the square. The two horses galloped out from the royal palace. Colleen just silently followed Elon and didn't say a word the whole time. He simply didn't know how to speak. Elon obviously knew someone was after him but was also silent all the time because he was annoyed with the guard's attitude. When he saw that Colleen patiently followed him differently from the rude-looking guards, Elon spoke up. "Looks like you didn't come all the way here just to criticize me for not inviting you." Elon took off his hood and suddenly turned to look at the Colleen. Why did the third prince of the Kairos follow this old man? Colleen looked at Elon without hiding his admiration, and in his heart he exclaimed, "I heard that if I reach the 7th magic circle, I will be able to completely improve my aging. Maybe I have just witnessed that ability with my own eyes." The prince had a very different view of Elon from the guards. Elon felt he was really respected and not because of the clothes on the outside, so he waited patiently for the Colleen to answer. The Colleen frankly asked, "It's late, are you still going to leave?" Elon did not even greet or get off the horse to celebrate with the Colleen despite knowing his identity. Elon only responded with indifference. Every time we open a door, the latch is usually too high. Elon knew himself to be so talented that he did not need to bow to the royal person. For some reason, wizards like to talk implicitly, so Colleen had to be extremely alert to listen and try to understand the subtle implications of Elon's words. Even so, Colleen was still a swordsman who liked to talk straight like a horse's intestines, so he couldn't help but get upset in his heart. What does it mean that the door was too high? Couldn't he just tell me straight away? Colleen also learned the words of the magicians, implicitly replied, "I say this because you keep your head in one closed door while there's another waiting for you." Actually, Colleen wanted to ask Elon, "Where did you hide the invitation?" Colleen continued to speak implicitly, "The wind was too windy, the dirt was all there, so I closed the door to prevent the wind." At the same time, washing the door latches clean, Colleen is trying to convey to Elon that, "I don't think the guardians make any mistakes, just to prevent strangers from having invitations." Elon looked at Colleen in a moment of amazement. He did not apologize but also judged me. It was because of his frankness or ingenuity. The next moment, Elon's lips raised in amusement. What an interesting prince. Elon began to observe the Colleen more closely. Even if it was the first time he met him, that gaze was not that of a 14-year-old child. Suddenly the smile on Elon's face disappeared. His eyes widened in amazement as he looked at Colleen's thin, bony hand. Elon's voice suddenly subsided, "His Highness," seeing the stone-like expression of the wizard statue, so that Colleen did not understand what happened. Suddenly Elon rode close to the Colleen, causing Raven to startle. Then Elon grabbed the Colleen wrist and said with a serious face, "Excuse me for a moment." If the body was agile before, Colleen could easily dodge Elon, but this body's reflexes were not so good. Colleen can only scream in amazement, "What are you doing?" In spite of the Colleen's opening his mouth in protest, Elon infused his magic into Colleen's body. Colleen suddenly clutched his chest without words, a familiar throbbing pain piercing through his heart. He never got used to this kind of pain, no matter how many times it happened. Colleen tried to resist weakly and Elon could also see the prince's painful face, but the wizard had no intention of stopping. It took a while for Colleen to realize Elon's mana was passing into his body. He clenched his teeth trying to stop the groaning. The amount of Elon mana transmitted on the day is more and more, causing the pain to be more intense. Raven's eyes suddenly turned ferocious when he realized his master's condition was not right. He rose strongly to separate the Elon from the Colleen. Elon immediately loosened his hand so as not to break the prince's thin wrist. Raven was worried about her master and ran away from Elon as if avoiding evil, but because Colleen had not ordered it, it did not dare to run away from there. Elon pondered for a moment and then said implicitly, even if he closed the door, he couldn't completely stop the wind. Colleen was startled and stared at Elon. Maybe he already knew the condition of his body. Colleen murmured to repeat Elon's words as if trying to understand that implication. Couldn't it completely stop the wind? In the end, Colleen did not intend to hide any more but frankly admitted to Elon, yes, he was right, starting from a certain point, I was no longer able to use mana. Elon glanced at the Kallian's hand again. No, the problem wasn't with the mana, he really didn't know it. Didn't he realize that the real root of the problem lay elsewhere? The skeptical Elon did not respond to the Kallian but just stared. Suddenly, Elon's eyes changed into fierce and angry. Elon's hand clenched as he reminded himself, I just came to see the sacrifice. Elon thought back to the reason he came here. He wanted to see how a country ruled by the descendants of dragons treated the magicians. Just as rumored, it's a shitty place, and you plan to humiliate the whole continent, with the intention of teaching the people in this country that there are great sorcerers who do not know how to keep, do not look for them. But now, Elon was faced with a situation he didn't expect. Elon began to ponder, whether his encounter, with the young prince standing in his way, could this be fate? Looking closely at the Kallian's face, Elon remembered the rumors in the streets that he had heard all day. Sisfanian identical prince. Elon emerged interested in Kallian, but there was doubt. Perhaps this meeting was not random at all, because the Kallian seemed to have fallen into despair, and the arrival of the Kallian at the palace gate came at the right time. The skeptical Elon asked the Kallian, why you want to find me? Kallian hesitated. The thing was. Kallian swallowed his saliva nervously. He thought carefully about his answer. If I lied, he would know right away. Kallian could say that he just happened to go for a walk and saw what happened between Elon and the guards, so he chased after him. Which is also half of the truth. Finally, Kallian got down from his horse and spoke after careful reflection, Elon Manaso. I need you by my side, Kallian bowing solemnly to ask for help from Elon. When Elon had not yet responded to Kallian's offer, he came forward and went on to say, I believe. Was about to return. Kallian was talking about the day he was assassinated, but he couldn't be specific. It would be better for Elon to understand that it was a quarrel between princes. Elon pondered, not that he didn't know the circumstances of the third prince. A prince hated by all. Everyone in the royal family was an enemy of the prince. Elon understood why the Kallian needed his support, and that wizard looked at Kallian, not saying no, just snapping his fingers. Right after that, a magic shield surrounded the space, just the two of them. Elon used silent magic to ensure that the walls of the forest did not fall, then he also jumped off the horse and walked to the Kallian. Kallian couldn't help but look at the blurred magic shield around him. He cast a spell without chanting. I guess he's the perfect wizard. Elon now asked Kallian if that was your goal. Are you simply preventing that from happening, or are you trying to find a way to eradicate the herb? Elon seriously looks at Kallian. Kallian smiled. As expected, Elon interpreted the previous words of Kallian as a battle of kingship. Kallian calmly answered, in front of his eyes, I'm just trying to prevent it from happening. Elon wondered what the meaning of Kallian's answer was, in front of his eyes. Then Kallian continued, but I also want to thoroughly address the root of the problem. Kallian confidently declared to Elon, to get what I wanted, even if I had to fight to sit on the throne, that's all. To claim the throne is too arrogant to come from a boy with a dead appearance and no iron in his hands, and yet Elon smiled. To the throne for him, it was just an option to achieve his goal. When he was just a prince with a dying body. Suddenly, Elon's eyes fell upon the statue of the Sisfanian placed in the middle of the fountain, a prince who looked like the Sisfanian. A prince needs him to achieve his purpose. Elon looked at the Kallian again with an amused smile, which was delightful. Elon has made his decision. He smiled at Kallian, so send me that invitation again. Elon thought, show me what you can do. Kallian gave a pleasant smile. Of course he understood Elon's meaning right away. It was not an invitation to attend the king's ceremony, but the right reason for Elon to help Kallian. Kallian suddenly bowed his head and fell to his knees. His white robe flew in midair and quickly descended like a feather. Kallian looked up at Elon with all respect. Kallian Ray Kairos, to see his master. Elon smiled happily, and I, Elon Manasil, accepted the prince's invitation. A flash of light in their eyes when the two of them faced each other. Elon's approval also meant a statement. Okay, I'm going to save him. Going back to what happened in the palace garden, Yan anxiously asked Slayman, are you sure? Are people in the palace who don't know who you are? Slayman firmly replied, I told you, I solved it all, you don't need to worry. Yan pondered for a moment and nodded, I guess you're telling the truth because otherwise I wouldn't be able to be with the prince. Slayman chuckled teasingly at Yan, yes, you are my son, but you look so poor. No one doubted when they saw that. Yan didn't seem to pay attention to his father's teasing. He frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. After a moment's hesitation, Yan falteringly asked Slayman, what about Leah? How is she? Yan seems to feel confused and guilty when it comes to his sister. His mood immediately coincides. Slayman understood Yan's mood. He smiled to comfort him. She is doing very well as the head of the division that you left behind. Slayman stretched up and sighed. Anyway, if you are bored with being a babysitter, you can always return to the same position. You are always welcome. Slayman looked far away and told Yan, we have to go tomorrow. It must be a while before we see each other again. Yan still seemed sad to bow his head. What do you mean? In 3 months we will see each other again. Slayman frowned at Yen. Did you really think about giving up your position as a prince's servant? Yen just thoughtfully bowed his head without responding to his question. Slayman asked Yen again. This time he turned to face Yen and the tone was more serious. Are you really going to quit being that kid's valet? Yen tightened his hands, a little indecisive, but he seemed to be in an irreversible situation. Yen hesitantly told Slayman, he is about to turn 15. Slayman frowned at his son. Even though Yen was not a strong person, Slayman still regretted seeing him so sad. He seemed to understand what was implicit in Yen's words. Slayman comes closer and says, Yen, hey son, do you know what the nickname of our Siegfried family is? Yen looked up at Slayman, hesitantly replied, that is. Slayman did not need to wait for Yen to finish nodding. Right, just as you thought. We are the Kairos, Slayman elephants who laugh with joy at the symbol of the family, a gentle and lovely creature. Slayman proudly told his son, it's been a long time, we haven't fought for the throne, it's because we don't want to go to war, it doesn't mean we're weak. Slayman went on to say with a face full of pride, we are strong, and called the king of beasts, people that even beasts couldn't touch. Yen looked bewilderedly at Slayman. Why suddenly his father? It seemed that he was so naive that he didn't understand that his father meant that he just did what he liked. Because no one can stop the Siegfried family if they want to do something. Slayman laughed and suddenly grabbed hold of Yen tightly. Why I mean, you sold and used my name at a bargain price. Slayman looks at Yen with affectionate eyes, so, just do what you want. That sentence of Slayman makes Yen speechless. Slayman clasped his arm around his loving son's neck. After all, this kid worries me about you. Yen didn't have the strength of a swordsman, so he couldn't stand his affectionate embrace. He cried loudly, stop, father, it hurt. Slayman still hugged and didn't let go, making Yen scream, I was about to die. Finally Slayman let go. Yen dressed himself while facing Slayman and cleared his throat. After all, the Duke Siegfried. Slayman heard that address and immediately showed disgust and waved his hand to chase away Yen. Duke, go quickly. Yen is helpless before he has to change his address. Bow deeply goodbye Slayman, then, see you later. When Yen had left, Slayman lamented, God damn, his insignificant stubborn. Slayman thoughtfully remembered when Kalian launched the swordsman's anger to tease him. Slayman wonders, after all, when did that boy seem so grown up? Slayman could hardly forget the moment he looked at that confident and radiant face of Kalian. Although his skin was pale, the atmosphere was still strong and attractive, surprising him. Slayman sighed as he thought about the disturbance that Kalian had just caused at the palace gate. He became more and more curious. Really, I wonder what that boy is going to do. The next morning, on the arterial road of the capital, inhabited by nobles, the sound of bountiful horse hooves caught the attention of everyone on the road. A luxurious carriage was heading towards the royal palace. The nobles fluttered as they looked closely at the carriage. Oh my god, I didn't see it wrong, it's really that symbol right. Everyone couldn't take their eyes off the black carriage adorned with nacre that was more precious than gold in the Kairos. On the car there is a symbol of 7 flower chains and a silver wand. The nobles continued to look at the carriage that was closing the curtains with curious eyes. I heard about his contract with Reverend, but why did he come to Kairos? When the people on the street were still curiously looking at the carriage, suddenly the carriage door opened and a well-dressed person. The aristocrats were still talking. Wasn't it obvious? Because he was going through the same thing. If it wasn't for his relationship with King Reverend, he would have been left behind a long time ago. Whispers become more and more difficult to hear, probably because of that rumor. Is it true? Was indeed the poisoned son of Elon Manisil? At this moment, the man in the carriage stepped down, causing the nobles who were opening their mouths to shut immediately. Elon's silver to red hair glistened in the sun. The surrounding nobles all gasped to confirm that the man was no one else but Elon Manisil. Elon got out of the car and stared coldly at the nobles. The torn robe he wore yesterday was nowhere to be seen. With the delicate attire of a high-ranking wizard, no one dared to stand in his way. Elon slightly smirked when looking at the respectful attitude of the nobles. His new disciple did something very cute. Last night, Kalian grinned and told Elon, understand, master, exactly at 9:30, he needed to go there and open the door at that exact time. Kalian spoke as if he had a plan, and now that Elon understood his plan, 9:30 a.m. is the time when many aristocrats will gather in front of the palace because of the main things that need to be reported to the king, and Kalian just waited for that opportunity to let the world know Elon was with him, as if the nobles began to gossip that, this is a plan to compete with the Breeson family of the 3 princes. It won't be easy. When Elon got out of the carriage not long ago, the king's assistant appeared. I was quite surprised by your surprise visit, Magician Manisil. The assistant with a group of servants respectfully bowing to Elon, please, sir, the emperor is waiting. After Elon entered the emperor's office, Romain received him very courteously and graciously, unlike the way he treated his son. After a moment of greeting and chatting, Romain asked Elon in amazement, what did he say? Romain was a little stunned to hear Elon's request. He hesitated to repeat, a place to stay. Romain looked suspiciously at Elon, Sir Manisil, in Caresis. Elon naturally raised a cup of tea and said, yes, that's right, I need a place to stay in Kairos. Romain sinks deep in a tangle of thoughts and doubts, a place to stay in Caresis, it's no big deal, and of course Elon was very welcome. In fact, Romain invited Elon to the office just to convince Elon to stay. In order to prevent Salice's influence, Romain thought he desperately needed a strong person like Elon Manisil to support him. However, Romain was very suspicious, so when he thought of Elon actively proposing in advance like this, he felt very overwhelmed. Romain wondered what Elon's intentions were. That was the problem here. He didn't think of it, but still felt suspicious of Elon's intentions, and on his face he showed a troubled expression. The conversation fell silent until Elon understood the doubt in Romain's heart and spoke again. To be honest, last night in the square, I saw a red-eyed black cat, Elon said with a very excited face, but Romain felt puzzled. A black cat. Elon continues to say with a satisfied expression, he's pretty smart, so I think I should teach him something, but we don't have a place to stay so. Romain quickly understood that the person that Elon was talking about was Colleen. Because of the commotion last night he had heard the report. Romain still frowned suspiciously at Elon. What were you going to teach the prince? Elon said bluntly. Of course it was magic. Elon took a sip of tea and continued, but this time it was a hidden sentence. Not only that, but I also plan to create an environment that cats will like. If we want to do that, we need help from the owner, and clean the house a little bit, Elon said with a confident smile and gazing straight into Romain's eyes. Taking care of the cat was just an excuse. From those hints, Romain understood Elon's true intention to suppress Salice's influence and support Colleen as crown prince. After understanding, Romain sighed anxiously, asking Elon, are you sure you can handle it? I'm sure you know my house is quite a mess right now. Elon smiled back, I volunteered to teach Prince Colleen, so Brisen had no good reason to stop me, and if they stopped Colleen from learning magic also means against me. I can't teach magic all day, so they can't stop a royal tutor from supporting the king. All these calculations are in the sincere invitation of the Colleen prince. Romain only takes a few seconds to think and agree to Elon's request. Okay, I'll give you the place. He stood up and lamented to Elon, this house is already a mess, so I can't leave it any more messy. Although Romain had left the reception desk, the conversation was not over. Unrelated to what had just happened, Romain continued to ask, to be honest, I was quite curious, heard that the child was nothing special. Elon's eyes narrowed, not special. Elon thought to himself, strictly speaking, it must be very difficult to find the ordinary in the Colleen prince, even his health condition is especially bad. Romain continued to speak without knowing that Elon's gaze was very displeased with him. I heard that he was afraid of many things, including horses, but when I heard him riding after him, I thought he was no longer the boy I had heard of, but if he was exceptional, I would have heard of him. The more Elon listened to Romain, the more puzzled he was. Why, all this time, he only talked about what he had heard. Elon looked straight at Romain with skepticism. Your Majesty, surely you know about the height of the prince. Romain did not answer, just silently turned his head to look at Elon. There was no doubt, he must not have known the answer. Elon still seemed to want to save some hope in this matter, so he asked, in some accidental way, if you know how tall the princes are, Your Majesty. Once again responding to Elon with only silence, Romain turned to face Elon's angry gaze. He was a little stunned at that look. Elon could not control the anger rising in his heart. As expected, he doesn't know anything. Elon looked through the pile of documents on Romain's desk and stood up. He said in an angry voice, depending on the time. That interest can be a poison and indifference a remedy. However, being busy is not a good excuse, Your Majesty. Elon glared to remind Romain with a sincere attitude because he himself had been a father. For a moment, the two of them fought. Romain completely did not understand why Elon suddenly had such a harsh attitude. Basically because through Elon's appearance, he did not know that Elon had passed the age of 50 and had once had children. Romain's eyes grew cold. He felt that Elon was invading his privacy and reproached, Monsieur Manisil, we will ignore the attitude of not knowing where we are somewhere, and assume that it was his interest as the master of the Colleen. Romain walked towards the door of the room and continued to say with an annoyed attitude, it's ridiculous that we have to explain this ourselves, but, I really care about princes. Especially that child, Colleen, he is my dearest child. Romain stood at the door of the room and personally opened the door for Elon, obviously wanted Elon to leave quickly. Romain tried not to show further discomfort and told Elon, I think we should end the conversation. However, Romain did not finish the sentence. Elon snapped his fingers. And a magic shield immediately enveloped the space, just the two of them. In the face of unexpected silence, Romain jerked his hand back from the doorknob. Interrupted, Romain's eyes filled with indignation, but Elon did not pay attention. He stared at the king without wavering. If so, he should stop listening to what others said and look at himself carefully. Romain angrily replied without hesitation, "What the hell are you doing, looking closely, and how can you use magic in a royal palace?" Elon's voice had changed, it was as gentle as a wind, but it gave the listener a creak. "Before calling that boy dear, let's really look at him. His lips are dry, his breath is broken, his skin was pale and pale." Elon recalled the Callian's languid appearance and couldn't help but lament. Beneath his bruised fingernails, his clothes have been made extremely quickly. How long it takes to make a garment? About a month. It has been sewn down to fit a body that has lost a lot of muscle mass in just a month. Elon seemed to be able to imagine the misery of the Callian. He tried to get up, unable to pull his body out of bed with lethargic eyes. He felt dizzy. Romain's angry expression gradually dissipated, replaced by a stunned and panicked look, which was impossible. Elon bluntly continued, "If you keep acting like an outsider like this, he would lose everything," Elon said, alluding to the fact that Callian would soon die if Romain continued to be so indifferent to his son. At this time, in front of the Callian room, Yen and the maid who served morning tea to the prince were waiting. The maid said anxiously to Yen, it was almost noon, and the prince had not yet had his morning cup of tea. Yen looked down at the morning tea on the tray that had been cold for a long time, but in the Callian room, there was still no movement. Perhaps because yesterday's activity was so overwhelming that his body could not get up early. Yen smiled wryly to hide his anxiety and said to the maid, "Please give it to me, I will take care of the prince, in case he has a cough." Yen gently entered the room, tiptoeing softly so as not to wake the Callian. After yesterday's busy series of events, the prince's common breakfast this morning was no longer a mandatory activity. Callian was lying on the bed with his faint breath intermittently, with his pale white skin. Everyone else looking at him probably thought he was about to take his last breath. Yen silently looked at Callian while still holding the tea tray in his hand. He silently lamented, he was still sleeping, maybe yesterday was a bit too much for him. Yen bowed his head anxiously, intending to sigh a little more, "Your Highness," but as soon as he was about to lament again, Elon suddenly appeared behind him and whispered in his ear, "Still not waking up, Vietnamese girls are waiting for," and turned his head to look at Elon and stood there, his eyes almost slipping out of his eyes in shock. Actually, who wouldn't be surprised when someone suddenly appeared behind them? After a moment of stupor, Yen jerked up, causing the tea tray to fall down. It was also fortunate that thanks to his attentive service skills, he promptly sat down and saved the tea tray. Seeing Elon calmly approaching the Callian bed, his mouth opened wide as if shouting, but the sound was extremely small. "Sir, Mr. Maniso, you're going somewhere." Yen followed the tea tray and hurriedly stood in front of Elon. He panicked so much that he didn't have time to think about putting the tea tray down in this mess. "Wait a minute, Mr. Maniso, how can you act so carelessly?" Elon calmly replied, "They said that outsiders could not enter the Shermill Palace without permission." Yen was even more stunned. "So what, you teleported here because you weren't allowed?" Elon replied proudly, "It's a space fold, it's a little harder, see, I'm pretty good at magic," Yen said softly with a wide-open voice like he was shouting. It didn't matter now. Yen steadfastly prevented Elon, "Anyway, please leave, the prince's health is not yet." Seeing that Yen was not easily persuaded, Elon suddenly leaned over to him and asked, "You know me, don't you?" Yen was bewildered by Elon's question. Of course he knew he was the Elon wizard, but Elon continued to speak without waiting for Yen to answer. "You came to Reverin a few years ago, you think I wouldn't recognize you just because you grew up?" Elon giggled and whispered in Yan's ear, "Baby elephant." Yan's eyes widened. He was even more stunned when Elon suddenly appeared in front of him. At this moment, Slayman's words flashed through Yan's memories, "Don't worry, no one doubts you because you don't look luxurious at all." Yan's faith was shaken. He couldn't cry out, "But I was caught red-handed, too fast." Elon smiled brightly when he was able to grasp the stubborn boy of the Siegfried house. At that moment, Callian suddenly woke up. "Yen, how long have I been sleeping?" Yen was startled by the fear that Callian had heard their conversation earlier. Prince." Yen hurriedly directs Callian's attention to Elon, "Sir, you have a guest." Callian just woke up, he couldn't see clearly, so he asked Yen, "Who is that?" When he was a little more awake, he realized that his master visited. Elon put a small bag of beautiful things on the table and told Callian, "Take it away, Prince." Callian curiously opened it right away. "What is this?" Callian slides the bag down his hand. Inside the bag are small white pellets as bright as pearls. Elon advises Callian, "Make sure you eat one a day and don't forget it." Callian bewilderedly held up a pill to look carefully. Was it medicine? Elon held up 2 fingers and said, "Now, you are facing 2 problems." Elon slowly explained to the Callian, first, that he could not control his mana. And second, that his body was severely weakened. Elon stared at the Callian's thin, dry hand and shook his head. Callian nods and admits, "I haven't said anything yet, but it seems that you always see through what happens to me." Elon pondered for a moment looking at Callian and asked, "Do you have the power to bless?" Elon nodded again. Yes, that's right, this power gives me the ability to recover and increase my sensitivity to magic. He suddenly remembered when his hand was wounded by Planche and lamented with Elon, though, it felt like that healing power was somehow gone. Colleen is anxious to ask for advice from Elon. Is there a problem in my heart? Elon asked the Colleen in return. He never thought it was a strange combination. Colleen was silent for a moment. He didn't have much knowledge of magic but was trying to find it in his subject's memory, and the subject has wondered about this in the past. Elon immediately answered according to what the host had once wondered, the mixture of recovery power and magic. I was wondering if the effect of the blessing had enhanced the health of my heart, because after all, the origin of both mana and life comes from the heart. Elon smiled because the Colleen was also quite intelligent. Yes, the right blessing power had enhanced the health of the heart. Soon after, Elon's expression became serious. But your blessing power did not disappear, my prince, and his heart was not damaged at all, his mana circuit was not blocked. Colleen frowned, wondering at Elon. So what? Elon asked. He had never thought about it. Elon said with serious and watchful eyes, if the blessing power of the Sisphanian did not disappear, but to be used to its limit somewhere. Colleen was blank for a moment. The power of blessing was affected by something that makes it impossible for that power to heal even the smallest wound. Soon after, the Colleen gaze became sharp. Impossible. Colleen clenched his fist in anger. Of course no one could calm down when he discovered he had been poisoned. Colleen asked Elon again as if to make sure his judgment was not just a misunderstanding, a poison. Elon answered resolutely, if it were not for the power of blessing, he would have died 8 generations ago. Elon spoke out the alarming state of the Colleen body, the deadly antidote strangling thy heart, healing power has reached its limit. More importantly, you even try to use mana. That's why your heart can no longer receive treatment. Colleen holds the pill in his hand and carefully connects the facts of his past life and this life. In his previous life, Colleen was originally killed by assassination. But it turned out that he had been poisoned before he possessed this body. This is definitely a long-planned plan. So why would they try to kill a child sooner or later because of toxicity? The more Colleen thought, the more angry he became, the more murderous he began to flow and show in his red eyes. Elon immediately recognized Colleen's angry feelings and murderous intent. He couldn't help but be startled, that is. This murderous intent cannot be that of a 14-year-old child. Elon looked at the Colleen in shock and wondered what he really is. Colleen still could not suppress his anger in his heart and asked Elon, so this must be the antidote. Elon nodded, that's right, I prepared it a little in a hurry but it definitely worked. Colleen continued to take the pill in his hand and silently thought. After a moment of reflection, he glanced at Elon and asked hesitantly, so what if? I said I would use both the antidote and the poison at the same time. Colleen held up the silver glitter pill as if it was an important part of his plan to save his life. Elon was completely taken aback by what Colleen had just said. What? Elon fiercely opposed that stupid idea of Colleen. Even if you took the antidote, if you put more toxins into your body, the antidote will only slow down the process. Colleen still sticks to his plan, that's enough. Elon couldn't understand Colleen's thoughts, so he continued to protest. Your Highness, are you really going to drink both of them, who might not know who the culprit was? Colleen calmly replied, yes, I'm also skeptical. Colleen gave his guess to Elon, whether the cup of tea I drink every morning is poisonous. I drink tea in front of everyone, so I can confirm whether I have used poison or not. I also don't drink the same teapot with others, maybe they think this is the safest way. Colleen thought, yes, maybe Colleen in his previous life discovered what happened to his body, and refused to drink the poison tea, maybe that's why he was assassinated. Colleen thought carefully, the situation changed after this body belonged to him. I don't know what method they will use to try to eliminate me anymore, so at least I have to buy time. Colleen tried to persuade Elon to understand his situation. Until he could get to the bottom of the industry, we have to keep this quiet. Elon hesitated or looked at Colleen. Really the reason was only that. Colleen hesitated for a moment and then continued, if there is a problem with the morning tea, then Yen and the other servants will be in danger. Colleen anxiously told Elon, the perpetrator has often done this, I'm sure he knows that those people will be guilty on his behalf. Elon opened his eyes wide to Colleen. It seemed that he still didn't know anything about Yan's true identity. Elon felt that Colleen's anxiety was excessive, so he let out a little breath. That kid would be okay. Colleen stared bewilderedly at Elon. Why? Elon did not want to reveal other people's secrets, so he said, well, nothing. Elon leaned back in his chair languidly and asked Colleen, I see, so what are you going to do now? When he heard that question, suddenly the memory of his father was clear in his mind. In a rare encounter with his son, he laughed sarcastically at him, stupid, Burin. He said things that the Burin at that time felt very repulsive, wanted to get the precious thing from others, you have to give something of yourself first, but now he suddenly thought of his father with a bit of bitterness, only at times like this, I just remembered you, Dad. Kalian, after thinking for a while, immediately asked Elon, tomorrow night, please take me out of the palace. Meanwhile, on the side of the Planche's palace, everything was shaking, his servant was screaming loudly and urging, Prince Planche, you have to get up. The Planche room door suddenly opened as if someone forcefully stepped on it. The servant's voice was both eager and nervous, the queen was all ready. Meanwhile, Salice's footsteps had reached the Planche room. The servant was still miserably awakening Planche, who was always drowned in alcohol. Your Highness. Salice walked in angrily and saw that the son had just sat up on the bed. She grumpily shouted at the servant, getting out of the way. As the servant crouched to one side, Salice went straight to the Planche bed and opened the curtain. Salice scolded her son harshly, it's too late to prepare for the afternoon schedule now, don't you think, Planche? Planche lethargically sat on the bed without even glancing at Salice. He continued to close his chin with drowsy eyes. Salice continued to rebuke Planche, her voice became more and more grumpy, and the whole body still smelled of alcohol. Salice was more and more annoyed when she looked at the bottles rolling on the floor, the screams increasing the volume even more. Was forbidden by the emperor to drink alcohol after the ceremony in the square without waking up, huh? However, Planche did not pay attention to that scolding. He calmly picked up the glass of water next to the bed and asked Salice, why did you come here? Planche indifferently told Salice, after answering, he could leave. His appearance made Salice boil even more blood. Salice directly to the point, suddenly that Kalian had an informant, and his master was the perfect wizard, Elon Manisil. Planche is not as calm as before. Salice reminded her son, the nobles were shaken, but she was still Planche's superficial tone. Salice no longer has the patience, so go close to Planche and glare up, Planche, don't let what I invested for you succeed. She used a strong and cold voice as if ordering, and seemed to threaten to speak, preparing for me immediately. Salice flicked a fan towards the underground servant, ordered to quickly prepare for the Planche. Before leaving, she also said one more sentence to her son, there will be a lot of eye judgment today, so don't let me down. Salice turned sharply and left soon after, the door slammed and Planche's face became angry again. Planche clenched his teeth and threw a glass of water on his hand on the floor, the glass splattered and scattered fragments everywhere, a few fragments cut Planche's hand, causing it to bleed. The worried servants shouted, Your Highness, the person is bleeding. Planche raised his voice to the servants who were zealously approaching, disappearing. Planche ignoring the wound and angrily waving his hand away the servant, all of you, get out of here for me, get out. Planche's mind was now filled with the image of Kalian's satisfied appearance. The more he thought, the more bitter, the more he couldn't understand how a humble and weak person like Kalian could change so quickly. Made him inferior and reprimanded again and again. That afternoon, according to the emperor's 3-day birthday schedule, all members of the royal family would go to a horse riding performance about an hour's journey from the palace. The people had gathered on both sides of the road early to see the members of the noble cannon corpses flying in the sky and the cheers of the people echoing all over the way. Long live your majesty, congratulations to our majesty, long live the king of Romaine, congratulate his godly life, wish his majesty a long and boundless life, to bring prosperity to Kairos. The king of Romaine rode at the head of the parade, and Salice rode right behind him in the carriage. Finally, the princes rode together. The people were eager to see the members of the royal family. The children paid special attention to the princes and exclaimed when they saw them, Father, over there, the princes appeared, I see, take a good look. The baby continued to speak in an excited voice, the last person to go was the one he wanted to see the most. Kalian Prince. At this time, Yen was walking beside the horse for Kalian and suddenly said, Your Highness. He looked at Kalian with worried eyes, is your body okay? Yen saw Kalian smiling, then let out a sigh and continued, Fortunately, your skin is rosier than it was yesterday. Kalian chuckled back, of course, I had a nice break. However, knowing in his heart that rest was of no use in this matter, he also breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe because I took the antidote, my breathing was easier, my heart attack was better. Yen worried too much and whined to Kalian, today was too many schedules, after the parade was a horse riding performance, and then there's the dance, what if you bleed your nose again, this is a bit too much. Kalian laughed to reassure him, Yen, don't worry. Kalian looked around the two sides of the road in an exuberant mood and told Yen, I still have the strength to meet my people, it's okay. Suddenly there were two mysterious people hiding in an alley that caught his attention. Kalian couldn't take his eyes off those two and had an indescribable sense of familiarity as he looked toward them. Kalian suddenly recalled the situation in his previous life, when Kiri had received all the arrows for him in the final battle against the Kairos. When he looked closely at the face of the mysterious man standing in the alley, Kalian immediately recognized it as Kiri. Kalian couldn't believe he could meet Kiri so casually, he called his name softly and Raven also seemed to sense the Kalian's concern towards the alley. Kalian stared without taking his eyes off, surely it was Kiri. Raven also followed her master's gaze. When Kalyan was wondering what Kiri was doing in Kairos, Raven suddenly changed its direction, walking towards the alley. Raven asked to change direction, making Yen painfully hold it back. Wait, why is he suddenly playing like that, going on to Raven? Yen yelled angrily at the horse, Raven, going straight away, but the more he pulled, the more he seemed to oppose. Yen was confused about how to turn his eyes to the alley that Raven's foot was aiming at. Is it because there's something over there? Kalyan now realized that Raven wanted to follow his gaze just now. He gently patted on it and said, No, Raven. Kalyan smiles and rubs Raven's head, Can you feel it too, but? Kalyan slowly strokes it, We can't go there yet. Finally Raven was willing to walk in a straight line after hearing Kalyan's mind. Kalyan's heart has now made up its mind, Wait for it, Kiri. I will definitely find you. Not long after, the parade arrived at the racecourse. Melfur Polun, the owner of the Polun Arena, greeted them warmly, Your Majesty, it is my honor to serve you like this. Melfur respectfully bowed to Romain, We have carefully prepared for the performance, guaranteed to make you satisfied. Kalyan observed and reflected from afar, so this was Baronet Melfur, who prepared for the horse riding show in place of the star Brisson. Kalyan recalled the dinner the Viscount Brisson attended as an apology for not organizing this event for the royal family. He groaned silently, which was why he was caught up in the futile intellectual struggle on the dinner table at that time. Anyway, that doesn't bother me too much. Kalyan thought of the name Melfur Polun he had heard in his previous life. From a scandalous incident that had spread the news to Sakrisha, Grand Prince Randall was injured by an incident. Although the injury was not life-threatening, he broke his leg and had to rest for about a month. It was not simply an accident. After that, they found that the light hanging wire had been affected by the sharp object, though it was not conclusive evidence to impeach Melfur trying to harm the Grand Prince, the grandson of King Tencel, but after Tencel's grievances, Melfur was condemned to hang. While Kalyan was busy thinking, Melfur led the royal family members into the stands, inviting them to go this way. Melfur pointed at the chairs that had been neatly folded under a chandelier, I have prepared a special seat for you. Kalyan looked up at the ceiling and immediately realized, it was the chandelier that would fall. He looked around, his heart feeling more and more skeptical. Strangely, in the event of the king's personal attendance, how could the knights ignore such a big thing, and also have the Brisson house's Pable knights always on duty? Kalyan suddenly felt resentful in his heart. Thinking of the Pable cavalry, I remembered that annoying old general, I dare say I'm a mouse. Kalyan couldn't help suspecting Brisson was interfering with this, something shady was going on, but instead of fidgeting nervously, Kalyan gave a smile again. He glanced at Melfur and wondered, should I give him a chance? After arranging seats for the emperor and queen, the Melfur turned warmly towards the princes and said, Your Highness, please come this way. Melfur grinned and said, If there was a problem, I would try my best. At that moment Kalyan passed by him and quietly reminded him, I see the chandeliers on top are not very good. Kalyan just spoke just enough for Melfur to hear, Go check. Then he passed by very quickly as if nothing had happened. Melfur stared bewildered, not understanding the Kalyan's meaning. He stared anxiously at the Kalyan and then glanced up at the chandeliers again. When Kalyan had sat in his seat as if nothing had happened, Melfur also stood up straight and looked up at the ceiling for a long time without saying anything, his heart suddenly a little uneasy. Very fast horse riding show started after that, the sound of horse hoofs filtering piles mixed with the cheers of everyone in the stands. Those who came to see the performance outside the royal family also had other nobles sitting in the lower stands below. Melfur took his seat right next to the Romain, an honorable position for the organizer of this performance. In his heart, Melfur was both excited and worried. In the end, he didn't expect this day to come to him. I have the honor of sitting next to your majesty. On Melfur's face, there is a look of excitement and nervousness. He looked at the seat of Romain right next to him and his heart was in flames. Could sit and talk to the king during the show without being interrupted by other nobles. It was not easy for a baron to enjoy such an honor for such a long time. Melfur rejoiced in his heart, I was well prepared, I couldn't miss this opportunity. Kalyan, meanwhile, was thoughtfully watching him, to see if he was smart enough to realize what was more important. The opportunity to talk to the king or the chance to escape death. Feeling like someone was looking at him, Melfur glanced at Kalyan. But Kalyan was still looking indifferent as usual, he didn't even look at Melfur when he turned his head. Looking at Kalyan, Melfur couldn't help but think of what he had said before. The feeling of insecurity came again, over his head. That ceiling, have you checked the ceiling yet? Finally, Melfur gave up the opportunity to chat with Romain and followed the Kalyan's brief warning and went up to check the chandelier lanyard. As a result, he almost fainted. Melfur's hand trembled when he held on to the string of the lamp that had been cut by someone near. What is this? Melfur silently breathed a sigh of relief and gratitude to the Kalyan, if not for that advice. Then just imagining it is terrible. But, how could Prince Kalyan know this? Melfur was both grateful and skeptical looking down at the Kalyan sitting leisurely in the stands. The hunch told Colleen that Melfur had finally figured out the problem, and he suddenly smiled wryly. Colleen smiled contentedly thinking about the action just now when Melfur used an excuse to beg the king to step down. Melfur Polun was also smart, renouncing sitting next to the monarch, relying on his ability to work, and his choice very keen, not pursuing immediate interests but being far-sighted. Although the immediate danger has been solved, Colleen still has to wonder, why make such a noise? What was the reason the Brisson family wanted to harm the Polun? While contemplating, Colleen involuntarily glanced at the Planche sitting right next to him. On the way here, Colleen's hatred for Planche resurfaced when he was reminded of Kiri's painful death, so, he naturally glared at Planche without intending to hide his displeasure. At this moment, the audience burst into applause and cheered loudly. Planche took the opportunity to whisper, "What a person who knows no identity." The host said to the crowd below, "All quiet, we're not finished yet, next is the proud cavalry team." A voice full of fear, sinister and cold came from Planche's mouth, "So repulsive and frightening, filthy and vile blood flows through you." Planche's curses immediately reached the ears of everyone sitting there. Randall widened his eyes in surprise to Planche, Celise turned his head to look at his son with a shocked face and grimaced miserably, and Romaine's sunken eyes also looked at Planche at the same time. Colleen covered his face with his hand, he couldn't suppress his emotions anymore, his face stiffened with anger. According to common reflexes, it is true that Colleen must be the most angry person at the moment. The blood is dirty and vile, Planche, that's what you're thinking. However, that was just the expression that Colleen made for others to see. Under his pale hands, Colleen's lips draw a long curve on top. In fact, his emotions are in stark contrast to the angry look. He could even get down on his knees and hail Planche's tongue for saying such things aloud to bruise himself. He's so helpful. Romaine heard and was annoyed with Planche's action, but he decided to ignore it, neither scolded nor warned that Planche would be punished, nor did he stare at him with disgust. This shows that Romaine does not expect anything from Planche anymore. Colleen is more satisfied in his heart. Okay, Celise, how far she would go to solve this? Celise hurriedly unfurled her fan to cover her frowned face with anger. Celise knows better than anyone that Romaine often ignores that Planche behaved inappropriately, because of respect for the Brisson family, but Planche crossed the line by insulting even Freya by talking about Colleen blood, moreover, saying right in front of Romaine, "Fervent Freya lover." The more Celise thought about it, the more irritated she was. "You idiot, I warned her that much." She was sure Planche knew what she was doing, because that's how she raised her son. Celise couldn't help but glance at the Planche, but when Celise's eyes and Planche met, she suddenly felt a chill in her spine. Planche had no anxiety or remorse, on the contrary, the corner of his lips slightly raised. That's when Celise realized her son was doing it on purpose. Apparently, the Planche did so to protest the fact that she came to see him this morning. Celise silently shouted with her eyes to Planche, "Why, today of all days, huh?" Elon had just arrived at the palace. The Colleen name also appeared in the talk about the crown prince of the nobility. On the same day, Planche made an irreparable mistake. Needless to say, the aristocrats were still hesitant about what the limits of the Brisson's power would think and do. The suspicion had quickly spread. Heard anything about the second prince? How could he say that in front of His Highness Romaine? It seemed that the king could no longer agree with Prince Planche. Colleen Prince is being protected by Elon Manisil, then he is not very suitable for the position of crown prince. We don't seem to be able to turn a blind eye anymore. We have to make a decision. Although the second performance was going well, no one in the honorable seat was in the mood to pay attention to it. On the lips of Colleen and Planche are both pleasant smiles, and each person is satisfied for his or her own reasons. As dusk fell, the performance ended well. Randall avoided the unexpected incident. Romaine didn't have a special reaction about Planche, everyone as if nothing had happened. Colleen silently breathed a sigh of relief. The situation was exactly as he wanted it to be. Suddenly he glanced at Celise, who was contemplating how to solve the problem that his son had just caused. He wondered, if the case of the Polun was staged by Celise, it would not have ended too quietly. Planche had caused trouble, but Celise is not stupid enough to forget important things just because of Planche's mistake. Colleen gradually realized she didn't seem to care about the accident that should have happened. He skeptically wondered, "Celise, so you don't even know about today's incident?" Colleen recalled his previous life as a Burin, heard about the accident of Randall. Chase asked Burin, "Do you think that the incident in Kyrus was simply a terrorist attack on the royal family?" Burin innocently replied, "In addition to hurting the prince, there is no other reason." Chase said, "It is possible. If simply saying this is too boring, then we bet." Burin laughed at his brother, "You're going to lose again, you don't know how much money I've won." Chase laughed too, "Ha ha, I haven't forgotten, I've calculated it all. Should I make a suggestion? This incident, I don't think it's too obvious, as if I want everyone to know that terrorism is targeting the royal family." Chase seems to have discovered something, but he didn't tell the Burin explicitly, so the Burin had to speculate what it was for a long time. Now in the Colleen body, he was surprised to understand the problem when he eliminated the second largest company owner in the Kairos, the most profitable one. Of course it was Renan Brisen, who owned the largest company in Kairos. After thinking and stringing together the clues, Kalian asked Yen, "Do you know what business plays an important role in the Polun trade?" Yen pondered for a moment and replied, that, if it's Polun, it's probably diamond mining business. Kalian brightens his eyes when he hears Yen's answer, yes, if the Polun guild disappears, then the diamond trading rights will fall into the hands of the Brisen trade group. Kalian chuckled, it turns out you're pretty wise, Renan, I just want to save the Polun and wait and observe the situation. But come to think of it, I should get a reply because I saved his life, right? Kalian is extremely excited about the relationship with the second largest association of Kairos. Meanwhile, Melfur was somewhere shivering when he felt he had just fallen into the hands of some barbarian. Kalian excitedly told Yen, cancel my schedule after the show. Yen was startled, why, but the next ball will be attended by most of the nobles. Kalian retracted his smile and looked sadly away, I thought I was shocked by the vulgar words before. Yen felt sorry when he saw the sad face of the owner who had just suffered deep injuries because of planche. Kalian smiles reassuringly at Yen and gives a reason that sounds plausible, so, I won't be able to go to the ball. Immediately after that, the voice of the captain of the royal guard resounded loudly, rectifying the ranks, returning to the palace. In the sunset, the caravan moved along the original route to return to the palace. When Romain had just returned to the palace, he had to receive guests in his office right away, which seemed very urgent and important. Romain's guest had left, but looking at him really tired was not the same as having a happy conversation, it looked like he had just experienced a shock. Romain languidly held his head in contemplation, in the past time, what had happened after all? In Romain's head sounded the warning of Elon in the morning, if he just stood looking like an outsider, he would lose everything. Then, ringing in Romain's ear was Planche's cold and firm voice. It is frighteningly disgusting that filthy and vile blood runs through you. Romain suddenly remembered the person he loved most in the harem. Freya died with symptoms like being poisoned, and before she closed her eyes she tried to hold the king's hand. The weak voices, Romain, Kalian, ours. At this moment, the king's office door opened wide, making him startled to stand up. The scent of rainieri flowers filled the room. The king's aide shouted the announcement belatedly, Your Highness. The queen came. When the announcement reached the Romain's ears, Celise was already standing in front of him. She was in such a hurry that she skipped the ceremony. The sound of Celise's heels touching the floor echoed everywhere, disrupting the quiet space of the office. Romain sat down again, silently looking at Celise without any excitement. The maid was confused by the tense atmosphere and Celise's sudden appearance. She crouched down with a cup of tea on the table and said, I would like to change the tea. Celise frowned at the hand of the maid who was quickly cleaning. He had a guest before, I haven't heard anything about this. At that moment, Romain lightly waved his hand, it was okay, she would leave soon. Celise's eyebrows furrowed. This was the first time Romain treated her like an unwelcome guest. Soulless Romain eyes towards Celise, then, Celise. What brought her here? Romain asked Celise with a voice as insensitive as his eyes. Celise clasped her hand on the side of the chair as if trying to restrain her daily arrogance. She had to lower her voice for the first time in front of Romain, that is, today's story. Celise wryly suggested to Romain, he is just a child, forgive him, Brisen will take responsibility for him, okay. Celise clenched her teeth and gnashed her gums, biting her lips hard at Romain. She never thought she would have to say these words to Romain. Romain raised her eyebrows. Until now, she had never come to see him no matter what Planche did. Celise had never been so humbled. Romain thought, Planche's slip threatened Celise's position. The top priority now is the status of Planche. He pretends not to understand Celise, responsibility. Even though she said she would accept the responsibility, Celise could not push the stick towards her family. She saw that Romain seemed to have made a compromise, but she was a bit arrogant and said, today's performance is impressive. Celise asked Romain with a laugh, what do you think about rewarding the Polun Guild, who organized it? Celise acted as Romain thought. He tapped his fingers with his facial muscles slightly dilated. She said that, it seems like she had an opinion before. Celise felt that the victory of the negotiation was at hand and immediately regained his arrogant posture. What did he think about it? Give them the right to supply all the royal horses and weapons to the royal knight. Celise gave a bright smile as if she was so pleased. Romain's typing finger suddenly stopped. He was too surprised by what Celise had just suggested. Romain involuntarily smiled as he recalled what Elon had just said in the previous meeting with him. The queen would give up the value of the other property, so it was as Elon said. Before a while, the one who came to see Romain was none other than Elon. He said to the king, there's no way the Queen Celise would give up control of the royal knights just because of this. Because she wasn't desperate enough to give it up, which was too important a card to trade for a slip of the tongue, she will have to pay the same price, so, Your Majesty, please ignore this. That was the advice that Elon had given to Romain just before Solis burst into Romain's office. Romain wondered in his heart whether this advice was the thought of Elon, or of Colleen, although he still had questions, but he still followed that advice. Romain nodded reluctantly to Solis, the dance tonight. Let Planche come with me. Solis is happy to open the flag in his belly when he hears Romain's decision. She replied with a big smile, Planche will be very happy. That evening, the king of Romain and the second prince of Planche entered the prom together. The Baron of Polun was given the right to furnish arms and all the royal horses as a reward for the performance he had given. No one is unaware that this is a transaction between Romain and Solis. Planche, the aristocrats, while clapping their hands to congratulate Melfort, didn't forget to whisper and whisper. The Brisson suffered so much. After all, Prince Planche's mistake today was not just a slip of the tongue. Queen Solis also has to be careful with the Colleen prince. Maybe it's time to rearrange the order. Some nobles felt the atmosphere and decided not to follow the Planche anymore. They turned to Colleen. Even if Colleen knew their purpose, he was still surprised by the sight that happened that very evening. A mountain of gifts called the Callion's fragile heart consolation that had just been hurt by Planche had been sent. In other words, this is a bribe gift. Colleen sighs and complains to Yen, isn't this too obvious? Yen was confused when he saw so many gifts sent to Colleen for the first time. What to do about these gifts, Prince? Colleen smiled to himself. The power of Planche and the Brisson family changed as well, but Colleen, after a few seconds of reflection, bluntly told Yen, I don't like the right guys, send them all back, except for things from the wizard and Baron Polun. Colleen freely turned his back to leave, not forgetting to tell Yen more, and check who sent these things to me. Yen was looking at the gift list note when suddenly this looks like it belongs to Baron Polun. Colleen curiously immediately turned around. Well, what did the Baron send? Yen pulled out from the gift box a sparkling jewel with all kinds of shiny gems. Colleen, as soon as he saw what it was, in that moment he was dumbfounded. Colleen couldn't believe that the gift in return for saving Melfort's life was such a colorful horse necklace. It wasn't even something he could use. Colleen pointed directly at Yen. He must not have given this to me to wear, right? What the hell did you say to the Baron at Polun? Yen laughed. God only. He asked me about the prince's hobbies. I answered that you appreciate the raven horse very much. Colleen smiled bitterly as he looked at the necklace. Haha, my God, it was unbelievable. My raven received a precious necklace that even I never received. Colleen clearly understood that of course Melfort would not return the favor of saving his life with just this necklace. Maybe he wanted to find out why Colleen saved him. Colleen also knew if he received this gift, Melfort will send you the true gift of his life. Colleen chuckled pleasantly. Baron Polun, do you know how much your life is worth? These little precious stones are not enough. But Colleen didn't need the wealth. He grinned and told Yen, calculated the price of this necklace and informed the Polun family, I will buy it because I like this rope. Yen stared bewildered at Colleen, who would not only accept it but instead, who would buy it, even though it's tempting enough to do so. Colleen shrugs back, we don't buy it because we find it fascinating, Colleen said here. He hesitated a little. I don't know how to explain it to Yen because the incident at the concert is a matter of the future that he can't reveal. Colleen immediately drifted to another topic. He pointed to a strange potted plant and asked Yen, but that horse necklace is not as attractive as this odd tree. Yen picked up the tree in disgust. Let's see, this is a gift from the Wizards Guild. Colleen curiously continued to observe the tree. It seemed to be moving. Yen was engrossed in reading the wizard's letter and said to Colleen, please wait a minute, did you write an explanation here or something? Oh, I guess it's quite rare, according to what is stated herein. Yen read what was written in the letter. This plant is very famous and loved among fanatics for its ability to disperse luminous pollen after death. Colleen heard that and immediately stopped. He opened his eyes wide in amazement. The next moment, Colleen gave a sly smile and a flash of light flashed in his eyes. There seemed to be another bold idea coming to his mind. Yen saw Colleen's unusual expression and asked him curiously, should I send it back? Colleen thoughtfully shook his head. No, keep it, I have a very interesting idea. The next morning was a normal morning as every day. The servant came to wake the Colleen up with a cup of morning tea, and while waiting for the Colleen to drink the tea, she pinched the curtains up so that the warm light spread throughout the room. Suddenly there was a clanging crash that made the maid startled to turn around, immediately followed by the scream of Yen, the prince. The maid was naive when she saw that the teapot was spilled, and Yen was rubbing to check Colleen's hand. Are you burned, sir? Colleen laughed and said, well, it's okay, my hands are a little slippery, I accidentally spilled all the tea this morning. The maid stared at the tea on the floor, restless. Yen immediately turned to the maid, clean up this place. He sighed and looked at the Colleen. Even the teapot was overturned, and this morning's tea is all over. Tea even poured on the flower tree that the Wizards Guild had just given to Colleen last night. Yen anxiously asked Colleen, "This is what he was given yesterday, don't know if the flower plant is okay." Colleen calmly replied, he's alright. Meanwhile, the servant cleared away the fragments of porcelain with constant uneasiness, glancing at the flowering tree that Colleen talks to Yen implicitly, there is no poison in morning tea or anything. The hand of the maid who was picking up the porcelain pieces on the table immediately stopped. She was so nervous that she broke out in a cold sweat. Colleen just noticed the maid's unusual attitude and he purposely appeared ignorant to Yen. "It's okay, just leave it there." "I quite liked it." Colleen deliberately emphasized to the maid that he paid special attention to the tree, but now the tree has begun to wilt, showing signs of withering. That evening, Elon, according to the appointment, smuggled the Colleen out. The Colleen on the way was very happy to tell his master, "Thank you for being so busy, but you still didn't forget to help me." Elon laughed back in a teasing voice, "Nothing, this was the request of a certain prince who dared to drink the poison at the same time as the antidote." Elon glanced at Colleen implicitly, "How dare I forget?" Colleen could only laugh at Elon's sharp tongue. Elon continued to speak, "Looking at you much happier than when you were in that palace." Colleen laughed and replied, "There's no reason to be unhappy, I've been waiting for this day for a long time." Colleen said words that made Elon feel confused. "This was my trip worth 1,000 gold. In fact, Colleen tried to stop himself from saying that this was the first time he had had time for himself since waking up in someone else's body. Colleen was a little nervous to ask Elon, "After all, this was my first trip out in a long time. Your Majesty really gave your permission?" Elon replied superficially, "I don't know." Elon shrugged casually. He must be listening to the report by now. Apparently Elon didn't tell Romain about this in advance. Colleen heard that. He could only smile sadly. "I knew it would be like that, but I have no right to say anything to you." Before that, when leaving the palace, Colleen suddenly informed Yen, "I will be back before morning." Just then he soared away on Raven's back and left Yen wailing miserably in the back. "Didn't he say he would be back before midnight?" Elon said to Colleen, as a teacher and student. Colleen smiled proudly to tease Elon. "That sentence, it means good." See the bright face of Colleen. Suddenly Elon seemed worried again. "The medicine I gave you yesterday was still taken." Colleen was a little taken aback by Elon's question, which he did not seem to have expected to receive so much attention. Colleen smiled at Elon with eyes full of faith and gratitude. "Of course, I drank today too. Thanks to that, my body is much lighter." Colleen chuckled thinking about his plan and said implicitly, "The owner of the poison teacup must be worried. He excitedly told me, I had just sown an interesting seed, so I would gradually see the outline of the poisoner." Elon laughed and teased Colleen, "My God, the disciple's ability is too much, so I will soon have nothing to do. I guess it's not so much that I don't need you anymore, isn't it?" Colleen replied with a laugh, "Of course I need you." Colleen grinned and thanked Elon. "The gift you gave me would be used in the most useful way." Suddenly the two horses carrying the two teachers and students stopped. Colleen said slowly, "Okay, now." Soon after, he turned his head in a different direction, before walking away without forgetting to nod to Elon. Elon shook his head and sighed and said in a moaning voice, "When it was time to break up, you wanted to go alone, I couldn't stop it." Colleen laughed at that sulky gesture of a man who is over 50 years old. "Haha, thank you for understanding me." Elon didn't want to obstruct the Colleen from riding away and didn't forget to remind him, the Magicians Association was on that Tynantia Street. "I'll be there, so when you're done, come find me." Elon then happily turned his horse's head towards the Magicians Guild headquarters. Colleen nodded and also directed Raven to run in a different direction. "Yes, so see you later, Master, I'll see you after we've both done what we need to do." After saying goodbye, the two of them sped off in opposite directions. Callion's first destination is Venetia Street. It is not difficult to see Venetia Street, even though the sun has set, the streets here still echo with the sound of hammers. Colleen just needs to listen to those sounds and come. Venetia is a blacksmith street. Colleen knew this place thanks to the intelligence of Secretia in his previous life. Any country will have intelligence forces, so this is not strange. After a long walk around the famous forges on this street, Colleen finally picked up a pretty good dagger. It's compact and sharp, the blade is so shiny that it can look in the mirror. Colleen happily put the knife away and climbed on Raven's back. "Well, my things are like this." He also looked down at the sword on the saddle with a satisfied expression. "Except for the sword that I need to use now, I've ordered the rest of the things that need to be crafted as required. So now it's just a matter of finding information." Colleen sat on Raven's back towards a street that was quite deserted and quiet, quite different from the noisy blacksmith street before. To spy on the situation of other countries, Secretia sent strikers across the continent, a person who provides confidential information of an opposing agency or country. These people not only manage the information collected, but also the assassins. They are well trained. Who had formed them were the Debulin, king of Secretia, and the Burin of the past. In other words, the current Kalian knew better than anyone about Secretia's intelligence forces hidden inside the Kairos, and he intended to take advantage of that. Kalian did not want to cause a disturbance on this quiet street, so he got off the horse and led Raven as gently as possible. He stopped in front of a small shop, the Nealangsha Courier Pigeon Rental Shop. Kalian took a deep breath before entering the store. The names he trained, I'm the one who knows how cruel and dangerous they are. At that moment, two drunks passed by, making Kalian a little wary. Kalian hurriedly pulled the hood over his face and turned back into the wall to avoid attention. In his heart he could not help worrying, on top of that, my current identity is the Kairos Prince. When the two drunkards had passed a distance, Kalian dared to sneak a glance after them. Kalian sighed slightly as he looked up at the store sign again. If they find out their tracking target appears right at the base, they won't send themselves all the way home. Kalian couldn't help but lament that Raven also had to wonder at him, but also this hair and eye color, it's hopelessly dazzling. Kalian told Raven to come and go as quietly as possible. Soon after he pulled the hood back again and was ready to enter the store. Chimpanzees, bells ring louder than yen bells ringing every morning to signal that guests are here. The birds in the shop were awakened by the bell and cried out at the same time. It felt like he was walking in a forest rather than a shop on a corner. The interior space is larger than it looks. Kalian walks inside the store while carefully observing everything around. It looks spacious. The shopkeeper who was taking care of a bird and didn't seem surprised by the Kalian's appearance at this hour, he calmly asked, are you looking for a carrier pigeon? Kalian calmly smiled and replied, no. Kalian silently looked at a strangely silent birdcage at the back of the shopkeeper. The two white birds that were leaning against each other slept soundly in it. No doubt, it was a pair of birds that looked like the real thing, but Kalian knew they were just a pair of finely sculpted birds. He asked the shop owner, these birds aren't getting woken up? The shopkeeper scanned Kalian's eyes for that short period of time. He replied with a wary attitude, they slept a lot. The shopkeeper's answer marked the beginning of a scripted conversation, the cues of Secretian spies. Kalian suddenly walked up to the store owner and continued to ask, these ones seem to fly from far away. Looking at them like they were worn out, the shopkeeper calmly replied, so they slept soundly like that. Kalian continued with his cue and his gaze fixed on the necks of two white birds sculpted with a lock at the back of their necks. If you want to rest tired birds, this is the best place to be. The store owner, who was on high alert, did not respond to the Kalian but asked questions. What did he come here to look for? From Kalian's memory, the next answer is very important. If you accidentally get it wrong or show any suspicious actions, the head will leave the neck. So Kalian tries to be as calm as possible and says, I need bird food. The shopkeeper quietly looked at the back of the Kalian and replied, there is also bird food here. Kalian's breath softly echoed in his ears in the heavily descending atmosphere. The chills ran down his body when he realized there was a murderous intent. At that moment a knife slid in and Kalian leant to the side. The very sharp dagger had only torn a small piece of cloth from the Kalian's hood and had not yet wounded him. With a dagger of 5 in hand pressed to the back of the Kalian's neck, the shopkeeper's voice continued to sound in the stuffy, tense atmosphere, but I don't remember selling birds to anyone recently. And I don't remember ever meeting you. The shopkeeper's sharp gaze stared at the Kalian without blinking for even a second. Kalian is a little worried because this statement is not in the script. Kalian has to come up with his own answer. For a moment he thought that if he could not answer, how to get rid of this blade, as expected, not a mediocre person, confronting this weak body may be a bit difficult. However, Kalian was the one who trained them, so he was smart enough to deal with this situation. Immediately, a slight laugh came out of the Kalian's mouth. It was obvious. Kalian put down the shopkeeper's dagger and smiled confidently. He had just left the nest and was looking for food. Then how can this place sell it? Birds here means the earls, the people who collect information, and bird food is information that is traded and exchanged between the royalty. The store owner's question implied that he had never met the Kalian before, so how did he know about the headquarters for buying and selling this information? But in case it was revealed when the Secretian spy was caught, the nobles themselves did not know each other's identity, so the fact that he had never met the Kalian could be explained by saying that the Kalian was a newly arrived bird, a new duke engaged in this espionage. As expected, the shopkeeper changed his attitude to become more peaceful. He asked Kalian, so whose bird are you? Kalian gave a sly smile and replied, I am. Under the hood, the Kalian lips gave a long smile. In the end, this answer would open the knot of the exchange. I am the bird of Nebilade. The shopkeeper who had just heard that name was stunned and glared up, because Nebilade was the anagram of Debulan, the king of Secretia. The shopkeeper's knife slowly lowered. The Kalian whispered in his heart, from now on, I will be the first Kairos prince to use the status of a duke of Secretia to get information about Kairos. Kalian thought more confidently and favorably. He gave a sly smile to the store owner. Now, let the new bird leave the nest for a bit of food. Immediately after that, the shopkeeper unlocked the secret room with the lock located at the back of the sculpture's neck and invited Kalyan inside. The polite shopkeeper went ahead and told the careful Kalyan to follow behind. Please follow me. Kalyan looked around the secret room with a little surprised and cautious eyes. So there was also a secret place like this. While the store owner is introducing himself, you must be new. In the future, we will see each other a lot, so first of all, we should know each other's names first. We are White Eagles. Kalyan didn't think much of inventing a simple nickname, the Red Swan. The shopkeeper still seems to have a bit of skepticism, glancing at the Kalyan before nodding his head. Okay, Red Swan. When entering a room full of documents, the shopkeeper turned to Kalyan and asked him what he needed to eat. Kalyan naturally pulled down his chair and said, an information, an item. The shopkeeper immediately held out his hand and said, 8 florins. He bluntly asked for Kalyan, up front, which made him stand up and not dare to put his butt down on the chair anymore. Kalyan frowned skeptically at the store owner, didn't ask if he needed information or something and had already offered a price, or intentionally seduced me to expose a loophole. Seeing that Kalyan hesitated to give the money, the store owner thought that he felt expensive, so he said, that's the price that has dropped. Kalyan at this time can reduce anxiety a little bit. After the Kalyan gave the money, the shopkeeper took out a small bag and a scroll and put it on the table. Now, here's the thing in the information, is the food you want. Kalyan immediately opened the scroll and suspiciously asked the shop owner, is it true that this is the place? The shop owner calmly replied, the space was right for the size of his description. Kalyan heard that and didn't ask any more questions but hurriedly stood up, thank you, this will be useful. When Kalyan was about to push the door to leave, the shop owner kindly said, be careful. Kalyan turned to look at him as if he didn't understand what he meant. The shopkeeper, who was now clasping his hands behind his back, seemed to be taking it easy, but the murderous intent was radiating from him. The shopkeeper gave a friendly smile, reminding Kalyan with a caring look, it's a dangerous place. Kalyan smiled back at him, of course, I would be careful. Elon left without letting his guard down, no matter how dangerous the place was. Then whether he is more dangerous than the White Eagle. It didn't take long for the Kalyan to reach the bridge across the river that crossed the capital. But at the end of the bridge, there was a group of people dressed in black standing and blocking the road as if they didn't want anyone to cross the bridge. Raven saw that, slowed down and stopped. Kalyan wondered and leaned forward to look at the strange group of people. What was wrong with this night? I shouldn't let others find out, but according to the map, we need to cross this bridge, it's best to quietly cross it. When Kalyan steered Raven gently close to the bridge, suddenly a hand came out to block him. Raven was startled and immediately stopped. Kalyan angrily questioned the group, suddenly blocked my way, what are you doing? The man standing in front of the crowd approached the Kalyan and politely said, excuse us. When he looked carefully at Kalyan, he discovered that the black clothes he was wearing were funeral clothes. His voice was so hoarse from crying that it was hard for Kalyan to understand what he was saying, though, the man still trying to slowly explain the situation with a very polite attitude. The deceased was at the end of the road, if there is no urgent matter, you can temporarily stop walking for a bit. Kalyan immediately looked at the river, the small candles placed above the red lighthouses were floating. He hesitantly asked, the deceased, well, everyone is holding a farewell ceremony. Kalyan climbs down Raven's back immediately, there is no reason to stop the deceased, I will wait. The other man bowed his head to the Kalyan, thanking him very much. The ritual of leaving the dead in each country is different. In Kairos, it is thought that when the red petals are floating on the river, if someone lives up and down, it will cause the deceased to lose their way. Kalyan quietly waited for the ceremony to end and his heart was a little broken. Just like in my Sakrisha homeland, they will put the sinistar, a special flower, on the grave. After the white flower blooms in the daytime, at night, the blue flower will bloom for the second time. People use Hoa Sinistar to mean that they will never see each other again. To perform the farewell rite for the deceased. In front of this scene, Kalyan's heart was cluttered with emotions and complicated lines of thought intertwined in his head. Kalyan thoughtfully stood watching the flowers floating on the river, suddenly feeling a little sorry. Kalyan's eyes flashed with deep sadness, a feeling of lostness in the land. I wonder if he put Sinistar flowers on his grave, or if he went back in time before he could. Since regressing in Kalyan's body, this was the first time he felt alone in this strange country. Looking at the floating lighthouse, Kalyan aroused a bitter sadness in his heart. After all, the deceased who lost his way is not me. Kalyan's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the man's voice, thanking him for stopping. The man kindly pointed at the bridge and invited the Kalyan to pass. Now he could continue to go. The Kalyan swallowed his sigh softly. Okay, no matter what, right now I'm just the 3 princes of Kairos. Kalyan regained the spirit of living for the present and immediately jumped on Raven's back. Before leaving he also comforted the man, he must have died peacefully. Kalyan did not realize his hood had fallen. He smiled consolingly to the other man, hoping that he would rest in peace. In that moment, under the lampposts along the glowing royal road, the man recognized who the Kalian was. He was a little stunned as to how to respond. While the man was still bewildered, Kalian urged the horse to run across the bridge and disappear into the night. The man stared at the Kalian's back for a long time. Another person in the group in black approached the man and urged, "Now we finish and finish, hey, you listening?" When the man did not respond, the other person asked, "What's wrong, Arson?" Arson put down the hood and whispered, "Nothing." "That person is a really good person," Arson said to his group, and when the Arson took off his hood, he was none other than the Arson magician who led the Valkan magician legion that killed the Burin in his previous life, whom Burin still hated to this day.